Hello, everybody. Welcome to another live stream on History podcast. Today, I'm joined by Professor Stephen C. Carlson, and today we're discussing his book titled "The Gospel Hoax: Morton Smith's Invention of Secret Mark." So it's good to have you back on the show, Stephen.
Great to be back.
Yeah, thank you for joining me once again. For those that may not be familiar with it, could you briefly introduce everyone? What is the text of Secret Mark?
All right, Secret Mark is either an early Christian gospel or the most spectacular forgery of the 20th century, or maybe a forgery at some other time. And basically, it is a text that purports to be a secret or second version of the Gospel of Mark. From what we are told about it, from a letter attributed to a Christian father around 200 by the name of Clement of Alexandria, is that it's very much like our current Gospel of Mark, except it has a few extra passages. And to give you a flavor of this, I'll read you what's in the longer passage. And it's a version of the raising of Lazarus in that we know from the Gospel of John. But here it's in a kind of like another version of Mark. And the text goes, "And they came into Bethany, and a certain woman whose brother had died was there. And coming, she prostrated herself before Jesus and says to him, 'Son of David, have mercy on me.' But the disciples rebuked her. And Jesus, being angered, went off with her into the garden where the tomb was. And straightway a great cry was heard from the tomb. And going near Jesus, rolled away the stone from the door of the tomb, and straightway going in where the youth was, he stretched forth his hand and raised him, seizing his hand. But the youth, looking at him, loved him, and began to beseech him that he might be with him. And going out of the tomb, they came to the house of the youth, for he was rich. After 6 days, Jesus told him what to do, and in the evening, the youth comes to him wearing a linen cloth over his naked body, and he remained with him that night. For Jesus taught him the mystery of the kingdom of God, and thence arising, he returned to the other side of the Jordan." And there's a smaller little passage after that's supposed to include the words, after he comes to Jericho, the secret gospel adds, "And the sister of the youth whom Jesus loved and his mother and Salome were there, and Jesus did not receive them." Now, we don't have any manuscript of the secret gospel of Mark. All we have is a purported letter by Clement of Alexandria that quotes these passages. And in this letter, the author claims that there is another Gospel of Mark that's been fabricated by a heretical sect known as the Carpocratians, and they added stuff like naked man with naked man and all other stuff, which Clement or the author of this epistle assures us is not genuine. And but it's important to also realize that we have really no manuscript evidence of this letter of Clement II. All we have is a copy of it written in a 17th century book. It was published in 1666, written in handwriting that looks like it comes from the 18th century. So it's a very kind of thin read to go from to the present. You got to look in the end papers of a printed book. Then it's supposed to have this letter by Clement of Alexandria, and he's quoting sections out of what he calls the secret gospel of Mark. Now at the time I wrote my book, most scholars were content to see this as an actual work of Clement, and they mainly disputed over whether it is a very early version of Mark. Helmut Kester and John Dominic Crossan thought stuff like that, or whether it's one of a common set of second century gospel forgeries that kind of fooled Clement. After my book, Gospel Hoax, the idea now is that this letter quoting it is not by Clement, and it had to be written sometime after, probably because it seems to know people after Clement like Origen and Eusebius, and at least there, my book makes the case that it could only really, if it's not by Clement, it could only be done in the 20th century, and it could really only be done by its alleged discoverer, Morton Smith.
Where did Morton Smith claim to have discovered it? And can you tell us about the suspicious circumstances of its discovery?
Right. Let me tell you a little bit about Morton Smith. He was a professor of ancient history at Columbia University. Born in 1915 in Philadelphia, he was from a fairly well-to-do family. His father was a glazier. He made glass, particularly stained glass, for cathedrals in Philadelphia. He was well educated, and he started his doctoral studies in the late 30s. And in 1940, he got a special kind of scholarship to study in what was then Palestine, in basically Jerusalem. And so he goes there in 1940, and then he's kind of like stuck there because of World War II. He couldn't get back for a number of years. And while he was there, he visited a monastery close to Jerusalem called Mar Saba, where he had stayed for like a couple of weeks, I think, maybe up to a month, and was quite familiar with that monastery. And then he writes a doctoral dissertation in Hebrew on parallels between the rabbis and like gospel materials. And then after the war, he comes back and does another doctoral degree at Harvard, and ends up becoming an assistant professor at Brown University. And where he was there, and he became very interested in the letters of Isidore Pelusium, who's this like Egyptian, late antique Egyptian writer. And he had a trip in the early 50s to Greece, where he photographed hundreds of manuscripts with this guy's letters. He had over 5,000 photographs of manuscripts. Many of these manuscripts are written all the way up to the 18th century. And he comes back, and he doesn't really publish too much while he was at Brown, and he was denied tenure, I think because his publication output was a little thin. And after a few stints at like Drew University, finally gets a job as assistant professor at Columbia University Ancient History. And the first summer on the job, this 1958, he does a tour of Greece and the monasteries in the Middle East, in order to like catalog various manuscripts collections. And one of those places that he got permission to visit is the monastery of Mar Saba. And he goes there, and he draws up a catalog entry of all the books in it, which is like published in modern Greek a few years later. And one of those is one of the books he catalogs is a printed edition of the genuine epistles of Ignatius. And it is the only printed Latin book in that entire catalog. There are other printed books in the library, but they're all in Greek. This is the only one in Latin. And the others were printed in Venice. This is published in Amsterdam. And it's possible to get a copy of this book on the internet. I bought mine, so it kind of looks like this. And I'll see if I can open this here. So here's the first page of this thing. Can you see that? Yeah, so it says the genuine epistles of Ignatius the Martyr. And there is a little, this is the front page, and has a little stamp of the library that held it. The copy that he finds or says is in Mar Saba doesn't have that front page. So there's like no ownership indication whatsoever. And he says that on the final end pages of this book, there's some blank pages, and I'll show you mine. Mine's blank. So this is the end. It says finis, Latin for end, and then you got a blank page here. And then if you turn it, you get another two blank pages. And he photographs, and on this copy that he has is written a text of someone just wrote in the end papers, which happens. It's not too unusual, and it's allegedly a copy of a letter of Clement of Alexandria. No letters have survived of Clement. We have some strange quotations, but in his book, he kind of gives you a photograph of it. Here it is. Right, so this is the first page. You got the second page here. On the other side is his Greek transcription, because this 18th century handwriting is like the ugliest of the Greek handwritings over the different eras. And it kind of ends right here. And so he takes photographs and he leaves the book in the library. So all we had for a number of years was the fact he had photographs of this that he transcribed. The book was in the early 70s. The book was a number of scholars decided to check it out for themselves. One of them is Guy Strumstra. And they went to the monastery and they got permission to look at the library, and they found the book there, and they opened to the back pages and they saw the text there, and they took it to the patriarchal library in Jerusalem, where the librarian received the book. At some point later, he removed the final pages from the book in order to photograph them. So we have now color images of this thing. And then apparently those pages that were removed have been misfiled and lost. People have tried to find it. They could not. So, they might still exist. I don't know. But they can't be found now. So all we have are two sets of photographs of this text. One in black and white by Morton Smith, and another in by the librarian at the Patriarchal Library in Jerusalem. Now, that means we can't do any kind of real testing or any kind of forensic examination of it. Can't test the ink or the pages, but the fact of the matter is, we know the book it comes out of. It's printed in 1666. And so there's pretty much no way that this manuscript can be older than that. And the handwriting does resemble Greek handwriting of the 18th century. So as a result, it's it's unlikely that forensic evidence could really kind of do much, even if we had it. The inks in it, I think it's an iron gall ink. It's very simple. It doesn't have a lot of ingredients, and so it would be unlikely that it would have things that might be out of place. Perhaps if you use chlorinated water to make it, you might see chlorine or fluorine or something like that, but that would indicate a more modern thing. But we can't, but the ink isn't available to be tested. So all we have are photographs of this thing. And does it look like an 18th century hand? It kind of does. There are anomalies. I think some of the anomalies I've been able to find, particularly the shape of the letter lambda, which has an L sound. It occasionally doesn't resemble what you see in the 18th century, but it does resemble Morton Smith's own handwriting. So I think the jury is very much out on whether this is a genuine 18th century hand. I don't think it is. Some people think it's too difficult for Smith to kind of imitate a generic hand. I don't see the problem with that. And, the fact of the matter is he didn't do it exactly right either. There are parts where he kind of messed up. But beyond that, so that's what's kind of, and when you take a closer look at the letters, there's, even though it's supposed to be written quickly, it gives that impression. There's a lot of retouching of the letters that looks like the writer of it was really cared about how the letters looked and kind of took several strokes to draw some of the letters, and that's often a sign where the script, if it's supposed to look quickly written, but it's in fact not quickly written, that's often a forensic sign of forgery. There's some dispute where they say, well, that's just artifacts in the bad photographs that he had. I don't think so. I think they're in the color ones as well. But, if we could actually find these things here, we could look at these letter forms under higher magnification. And I think it'll show that there are many cases that have retouching of letters where several strokes are done instead of one fluid stroke. You have sometimes, if the person's drawing too slowly, it kind of produces a tremor-like appearance. I think that's evident as well. But in general, it'd be nice if we had the original stuff to do a proper examination. But in general, I don't think that the handwriting as such excludes the modern date. The other problem is there's no trace of this book in Mar Saba at all before Smith got there. We have a catalog from the early 1900s, and it's not mentioned. Now, catalogs aren't always complete, of course. But if you're looking for evidence that it had to precede Morton Smith's visit to that monastery in 1958, we don't have it. We just have his say-so that he left the book in the library. We could presume, he kind of implies that it was there when he found it, but I personally think he smuggled it in. It's not hard. It's not hard to find a copy of this book. He was an avid book collector. Book's not particularly expensive. I paid about $300 for mine. $300. Would have been cheaper back then, although, cost of living. So in terms of the artifact itself, it no longer exists. It could be worth examining. So we're kind of left with like literary reasons for why this can't be what it purports to be. And this gets us to the letter of Clement. It's in the name of Clement of Alexandria. He the real Clement lived flourished between 185 and like 215. He wrote a number of books. One of them is lost. It's called the Hypotyposes, sketches. Wrote another book called the Stromates, which is it's like a philosophical work. He's got some other things as well. And he wasn't a very popular writer, so it's kind of rare to see Clement quotations. And in fact, all of our incomplete works of Clement basically exist because of a single 9th century manuscript known as the Arethusa Codex that happens to preserve most of his works. And if we didn't have that codex, we probably wouldn't know anything much about what Clement wrote. And now the consensus is that there are too many anachronistic elements in that text for it to be written by Clement of Alexandria. There's parts that show the influence of Origen, who was a successor of Clement in Alexandria. He's about 250. There's some parts, particularly the parts where he talks about the origin of the Gospel of Mark, that appear to be dependent on Eusebius. Eusebius is a church historian writing about 325, and there's kind of like some later things as well. So now nobody thinks that it was written by Clement, actually. Now the problem is that this letter is very Clementine. I mean, it has his style. It has all of Clement's vocabulary. It avoids vocabulary that isn't attested in Clement. And it's awfully hard to imagine anybody being capable of doing this before there was a major concordance of Clement's work in the early 1900s. And so people say, well, maybe it's a 5th, 6th, or 7th or 8th century, forgery by a monk. That's just not the way they did forgeries back then. They hardly ever imitated the style of those whom they were forging. Sometimes they would use a technique called cento, which is you like take bits and pieces out of a work and kind of reassemble them together in a different order. That's kind of what the Gospel of Mark fragments look like. It looks very Markan, but it looks like they took them pieces from here and there and kind of stitched them together as a pastiche. Excuse me. But the Clement parts are not a cento. It is it is something that fits his basic vocabulary, his diction, even down to the patterns of how he ends sentences. And it's inconceivable that anybody other than Clement in antiquity or late antiquity or even the Middle Ages could possibly be able to kind of imitate Clement in this way, much less even have a desire to imitate Clement in this way. But in modernity, when we're really concerned about authenticity, this kind of makes a whole lot of sense, because we've managed to de-authenticate a lot of writings by looking at how many words, which words do they use, and does the vocabulary match the vocabulary that we see in the genuine writings of a particular author. We're really concerned with words used exactly once. We call them hapax legomena. And what's interesting is every writer has a certain set of words they use only once, and a certain proportion with words that they use twice. And so this new letter of Clement, so to speak, hardly ever uses any new words that are not already found in what we know of Clement's writings, and it uses a lot of words that are only attested once previously to this there. So it looks like the person, whoever wrote this thing, was thoroughly familiar with Clement's diction. Now, in the 20th century, anybody who got the critical edition of Clement's works from the GCS series would have a little concordance and kind of know exactly what Clement's words were. So this is something. This text is something that really could only be done if not by Clement, and I think it's too much like Clement for even Clement to do it, but by somebody in the 20th century who is well aware of what counts for authenticity among scholars in the 20th century. Morton Smith, I think one of the most brilliant minds among biblical scholars of the 20th century, was certainly capable of doing that. He was involved in forgeries, like showing them to be forgeries, and so he's kind of well aware of how scholars would authenticate or de-authenticate works, and so that's why I think it has to be a 20th century work. and pretty much nobody other than Morton Smith is a good candidate to have produced this. It requires considerable erudition in a number of areas. Greek manuscripts, Clement of Alexandria and other patristics, Gospel of Mark, and Morton Smith has worked on or published in all of these areas. He's like the perfect person to do this. It kind of overlaps his interests very well. It's at the intersection of his several core competencies. So that's what I think is suspicious about it, and that's why I think he did it.
Can you talk about the problems with Fyodor and how unclementine it is, and also some kind of technique involving salt that did not exist at the time of Clement?
Right. He's got he's got a bit in this about mixing salt. Let's see. For true things being mixed with invention, this is from the letter, are falsified, so that as the saying goes, even salt loses its savor. So the idea basically is that you could kind of adulterate salt. You could have pure salt and then kind of put some stuff in it and kind of affects the flavor. In antiquity, you didn't have pure salt. Kind of mined it in various areas. Pliny the Elder, this encyclopedist, talks about different places have different kinds of salt and they kind of taste different. And, like the true gourmands know which they're. No one. But in the 20th century, they started to combat iodine deficiency, started adding iodine to table salt, and a lot of people were complaining that it kind of changed the flavor there. So it is a metaphor that really makes sense in the 20th century. Didn't make sense in antiquity, and it's like one of several stuff that really kind of fits the mid 20th century a lot better than antiquity. Also, you have to realize that the biggest manufacturer of salt in America, a lot of Europeans don't get this, is the Morton Salt Company, and their products are everywhere, and their packaging is famous. They've been subject to antitrust lawsuits by the Justice Department in the 40s, and so the association of salt with Morton Salt is, and you have that with Morton Smith is, I think, quite humorous on Smith's part, and I use that to kind of try to figure out if this is his fake. What kind of a fake is it? Because there's a variety of possible motives that he could do. I tend to think it's fits under a hoax. That's why the book's called Gospel Hoax. And he's trying to pull a fast one over the Academy. I think it's a bit of a revenge hoax. He was this thing comes out when he was denied tenure at Brown, and I think it's a way to prove that he, at least to himself, is indeed smarter than everyone else in the Academy. And I think as the as events kind of transpired, he was on this thing considerably smarter than his detractors at the time.
Rebecca Raven, thank you for your super chat. Thanks for more fascinating content. Well, thank you, Rebecca. Appreciate it. So did anyone else claim to have seen this supposed original manuscript of this Mar Saba letter talking about Secret Mark?
I just want to be clear that there are no manuscripts of Secret Mark itself. The only manuscript, if you will, of Clement's letter is the back pages of this book on the genuine epistles of Ignatius. Smith photographed it. I think at least 4 scholars who transported or had the book transported from the library in Mar Saba to the library in Jerusalem, they saw it. They saw that it was written on the back pages of it. I think the librarian at the Patriarchal Library has seen it. He removed it from the book. He photographed it. We have those photographs. And but no one's seen it since it was misfiled or lost in the library. So no one's seen it since the mid 70s or so, almost 45 years ago. So no one's seen it for 45 years, but enough people have seen it before that I'm pretty confident that someone did take the time to write this text into the back pages of this old book.
Was Morton Smith's homosexuality part of his agenda to create Secret Mark?
Well, that's a very kind of touchy subject. A lot of defenders of the work, thinking people like Charlie Hedrick, who just thought that Smith's critics are just gay bashers and things like that. I don't read Smith's motives that way. I think it's basically a revenge hoax, meant to show that he could pull someone over on everyone. I think the homoerotic elements in it, which I disagree with the recent book saying that they are undeniably homoerotic. I think they are deniably homoerotic. It is very, the ambiguity is very calculated, and it pushes on a number of buttons that really only work in the 20th century. I think that's just part of trying to rile people up, and to do that, Smith knows very well the attitude of many Christians of the day towards gay people at that time. In fact, he penned an article in the Journal of, I don't know, Psychiatry and Spirituality or something like that. I forget the title. Basically saying that basically saying a gay person can't be a Christian, and so he's quite aware of that attitude of there, and then and it kind of suggests that their Lord and Savior might well be a gay person. I think he knew that would cause a lot of controversy, and I think that's why he did it, because he knew of the effect it would have. People are talking, speculation that he was trying to create a gospel in his own image. I mean, he didn't believe any of those gospels, even the legitimate ones, and he needed proof for that. I mean, his subsequent scholarship doesn't rely on this letter at all, which is, I think, amazing. Generally, when people find stuff, they tend to be overly enamored with their discoveries and use it way too often. And in fact, he does the opposite. He hardly ever points to it as Jesus the magician, his famous work on Jesus, suggesting that he was a magician going around. Although it cites the background material in his book on Secret Mark a lot, doesn't actually depend on anything in the letter. So if Secret Mark never existed, Smith's work on Jesus the magician would not be affected one bit. And so it's not further scholarly views, really. It didn't. It's not to prove somehow that, his version of Christianity is correct. I don't think even though he remained an ordained Episcopal priest, I don't think he was much active in that as well. He didn't kind of need that for proof. That's not kind of how that works. He was more of an Anglo-Catholic and likes tradition anyways. And so I think it kind of fits in. If I read these kind of jokes and elements in the thing correctly, I think it's just a big put on against against the academy, just trying to say, I'm smarter than you. I could even put these things in. It's kind of taunting the academy, um, and the big problem is that his detractors, like the fundamentalist types, didn't even entertain its authenticity for 1 second and just condemned it, while as his allies, particularly Helmut Kester in Harvard, where Smith desperately wanted to work, um, thought thought the thing was legit. So he ended up fooling the wrong set of people and kind of painted himself into a corner. And I think that's why we never got a deathbed confession or anything like that from him. He carried it to the grave.
So you would say that he wrote this text to try to make it look like he found this text that, oh, Jesus uh, and this naked man are hanging out together for a night, and he taught him all the wonders of the world, to make it look like that Jesus was a homosexual as part of rage bait.
Rage bait, yeah. I think that works as a characterization. I didn't quite have that vocabulary when I wrote the book. It was still youngish. But yeah, I think it could be a kind of rage bait, and it did enrage quite a few people. Um, so it was effective in that.
Where do you think he? Well, let me rephrase this. Do you think that he purposely avoided citing his own creation because he is part of? You would say that's evidence, basically, deductive evidence that he knew what he did, that he's the one that did it, and he tried to avoid citing what citing his own fake in case people figured it out.
Yeah, I think he. His scholarship was very thorough, very exacting. He would often castigate people for all kinds of errors and mistakes that they made. He did not want to make any mistakes. And he really cared about his scholarship. And in fact, his work on Jesus the Magician is, I think, kind of like the culmination or the pinnacle of his scholarly work on the historical Jesus. And I think he did not want that book to kind of get lumped in with the secret gospel of Mark and kind of have that, in case it ever gets shown to light, or even if he chooses to show it, it like wouldn't affect the foundations of his research on that other project that he actually did care about. And so he was very careful to make sure that nothing rests on the secret gospel Mark in that, and which is why uh, people working on Jesus and magic actually find his work on Jesus the Magician quite helpful and for that kind of avenue of research still. But yeah, it's all these theories about who Jesus really was, and even the kind of theories that scholars really love about, is Mark the first gospel, or does it depend on, does it have links with the Gospel of John? And with this Lazarus story, it kind of looks like it might have links with that. And so Helmut Kester up in Harvard goes ahead and kind of flips the order and says, the secret gospel's first, and they kind of redacted it and took out all the stuff that kind of resembled John there. And so our Mark is actually derivative gospel, and there's things in it. Of course, that incident, if you believe it somehow to be more original than what's in John, it would show that John is an embellishment of something. This idea that Jesus resurrected Lazarus is not true if you kind of believe that. And so that's why some people were upset. But in general, it kind of makes you think about gospel relations in kind of a new and kind of exciting way if we actually did have this thing. But we don't. It's a 20th century text written by somebody who knows what 20th century scholars were really interested in.
What would you say, if you had to put your finger on it, what would you say is the biggest giveaway that Morton Smith is the author of this fabrication?
Um, I kind of I viewed it as means, opportunity, and motive, of which the first two are the most important. One is I documented every aspect of Smith's career, showing that he was capable of each and every element of this text. He was well trained for it. In fact, he was one of the best members in the academy in this. And in terms of opportunity, uh, has to be in the 20th century once we had a concordance of Clement's works. And it was at a monastery he knew well, and he just leaves the book there. So pretty much the process of elimination, no person other than Morton Smith could have done it. I just don't see how. I don't see how, like, for example, a 6th century monk or 7th century monk in Mar Saba could have done this. I mean, it requires an absurdly modern view of literary authenticity that nobody had in those days, and it requires resources that they didn't have. I mean, we have no evidence that the works of Clement, which are kind of big, that we have now, existed in their entirety at Mar Saba. We have a few quotes here and there, that one or two of those books there, but someone would have to have all those works and then compile a concordance out of it, and then for some reason decide to compose a text using words that Clement had already used before. It's just there is no parallel in antiquity for people doing that. The Mark side is not that difficult. The text really does look like Mark, and it's because it's a cento. It's kind of a pastiche of separate parts of Mark, and we do have evidence of that in antiquity, like the Paul's epistle to the Laodiceans is a cento or a pastiche of his epistles to the Galatians and also Philippians. So that technique is kind of known, but the idea of just imitating somebody else's style according to criteria that didn't really pop up into the 20th century much is kind of mind-boggling that anyone could have done it prior to the 20th century. And since Smith is the only one really capable of doing it, he had the means, he had the opportunity, and I think the motive fits as far as I understand it. People can suggest different motives, and these big activities are complex. There could be multiple motives. That doesn't bother me if he really wanted to be meaner than I thought he was. So it's pretty much just him. Now, we had a number of readers for my book, Baylor University Press, and one of them was William Calder, who was the third. He was an associate of Smith and knew him well, and as far as the attempts at humor or the bits of humor that I pointed out, I mean, his readers' report said, yeah, that sounds just like kind of sense of humor that Smith had. And so I think all of it fits Morton Smith to a T. I can't imagine anyone else who could possibly do it. A lot of people are upset at Smith for kind of wasting their time with this text because he never came clean. And that's certainly on him, for wasting people's time and kind of messing up the waters with inauthentic works in our jobs, hard enough as it is, just dealing with the stuff we think is authentic, and this stuff swims in a sea of all kinds of fakes throughout the years. I'm currently looking at a 6th century fake under the name of Dionysius, and it's all part of the thing, but it just makes their jobs harder.
So that text that was supposedly that all of this stuff supposedly is based on, or the material coming from, I think you said earlier, 1660. Was that right? There's a work going back.
1666 is the book, yeah.
1666. So did he take something from that time, and then he wrote stuff in it, and then he put it in Mar Saba, and then took it back out?
I think he was a book collector. He collected tons of books. You could find this book on the used book market. It was pretty popular. I bought a copy. I think he wrote it at home, if you will, in New York City, there, and just transported the book to the library and just dropped it off. Now, there was security at the library. They want to make sure you didn't take books out, but often library security is pretty bad at making sure people don't smuggle books in, and so which is not hard to do. So I think he already had it made and he just dropped it off for it to be found. Where in fact it was found, let's see, 58 to 73. So it was found, what, 15 years later? right where he said he left it. You know, it's rather unfortunate they got lost again, but you know that's not on him. Although some people try to blame him for not securing the book because it's so great. I mean, it was in a library. I mean, that's secure-ish. You know, it's like it's like suggesting that non-Western Europeans don't know how to secure their own stuff or something like that, and he has, as a result, responsibility for keeping it. Now that's ridiculous. He left it there, and that's what I think he did. So like some of the complaints that people have, like, oh, there's no way he could have done it in, Charlie Hedrick, for example, visited the monastery. And he says, I sat in one of those cells, and you can't do it there. And and I'm agreed, yeah, you can't do it there, but he didn't have to do it there. He could do it back home in New York and just bring the book over.
So I just want to remind everybody to go get The Gospel Hoax, Morton Smith's Invention of Secret Mark. And I have the link to the History Value Amazon, the link in the description below. And that being said, thank you for joining me today, Stephen Carlson.
All right. Thank you. And thank you for giving me an opportunity to talk about my work.
Of course. Thank you for coming on.
Hello viewers, thanks for watching this video from the History Valley YouTube channel. Please don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell. And if any of you wish to further support this channel, please consider checking out this channel's Patreon page and becoming a patron, and or donate through PayPal or through Super Chat during your live stream. Thank you.